The Face by Walter de la Mare. Nora sat on the edge of her iron bedstead, the fingers of one hand firmly grasping the rail, her two strong legs set wide apart, half supporting her as she gazed out of the window. The eyes under the dark brows in her square, strong-boned face were vague with reverie, aware yet heedless of all that was happening in the neat rectangular back gardens down below. It was 2:00 and a Sunday afternoon. The leisurely September sun was now slanting fiercely towards the west. Its beams shone through the yellow and red of the canary creeper and the nasturtiums along the garden fence, as if their flowers were of frailest colored glass. And the panes in the gay green and white little greenhouse at the foot of George Trimmon's garden flashed so like a heliograph that the face up at the window shone in its reflected light, like the moon's. Mrs. Trimmon's, his mother, voluminous body, large grey head, having now gone indoors, no doubt for her Sunday nap, George was sitting in his shirt-sleeves among his pigeons, snow-white creatures that torelued and paced and ducketed on the gravel about his feet, while two of their fellows cooed love-secrets into his ear. Across a white wing he would ever and again cast up furtive glances at the open window. But Nora just now wasn't thinking of him. She was trying to make up her mind whether to set off at once for the ponds or not to. She knew that everything would be bound to look different. She realized that, in spite of its vividness, the memory of the night before might seem little more than an illusion in the light of day, and that of a Sunday afternoon. But she must chance it. She had even now and then positively hoped, though her lips tightened a little at this, that it would. Either way, it would be better to have it over and done with. In some respects, the whole experience had been so absurd, so ridiculous and fantastic, so unlike her usual commonsensical self. What, indeed, can it have had to do with her, and how could it possibly have made such a difference? Still, even if it had done so, just for the time being, what did it matter? Except, well, would she ever be able to explain it even to herself? That was the worst of it. There was no positive need, of course, to tell anyone else a word about it. But George, she would have to tell George. Exactly what? How much? He might understand the solitary walk, the wish, almost the craving, to be alone. He might think her silly, daft, if you like, so far. But what about the face which she could still see, even with her eyes as wide open as they were open now, and fixed on his pacing pigeons? That was the absurdest thing of all. How could George possibly ever be made to understand that? The decision would have to wait for a while until they were alone again. But how was she to sit through the evening that was coming as if nothing had happened? Never before in all her born days had Nora's mind been so full of thoughts that wouldn't stay straight, that wouldn't match, that wouldn't let her out. What could be wrong? What had come over her? And when was she going to become her usual matter-of-fact self again? Hands, like her mother's, square and capable, but now idle in her lap. Her bosom slowly heaving as she drew breath, her thoughts at length drooped back into daydreaming again, and as if into the company of another self. Then suddenly, with a sigh as deep as water from a well, she withdrew her gaze from the window, floated up out of her reverie, and here she was, back in her small square bedroom again. Illuminated texts hung from unnecessarily large nails against the faded, damp-stained, blue-patterned wallpaper. Thou searchest out all my ways, above the grained washing-stand, and, over the mantelpiece, the price of wisdom is above rubies. Its price in pale green, its wisdom in clear blue, and its rubies in rich red. Nora, from the time when she was a little girl of 5 or 6, had explored every fraction of every inch of these texts again and again. She knew by heart every single one of the wooden-looking doves in the first, every seashell and fragment of seaweed in the other. On the mantelpiece itself were arranged her china animals, quaint, hideous treasured creatures, some with large bows of ribbon round their necks. They were one and all eyeing her with the vacuous grin combined with an incredibly void stare. And in between them stood photographs of bygone boys, one of them in a hard straw hat leaning nonchalantly against a property urn, another with his brother seated on the steps of a bathing machine in marine surroundings, and the same young man now topped with what appeared to be a rococo paper nightcap, and evidently the life and soul of an animated and well-bottled group in an open charabanc. On the chest of drawers, Nora's father, Mr. Hopper, faced Nora's mother. He, as usual, was gazing blandly out of the cardboard at his daughter, and her mother sitting there, ample yet solid, was staring no less flatly across in his direction, as if at the moment she had far from approved either of him or of the photographer. However, there she was, and who cared who saw her? Nora took after them both. She had her mother's compact, square head, frank, challenging eye, and full figure, and yet, even at this moment, a glimpse of her father's half-wistful reserve lurked somewhere in her young, vigorous features. Of George there was no trace in the little room. Although Nora had been engaged to him for weeks now, his photograph was still shut up in a drawer. Why, she hardly knew. She didn't mind Alf and Sidney watching her dressing and undressing out of their skimpy little frames. They had nothing to do with it. Why George, then? He was coming this evening to Sunday supper, to be introduced to Uncle Ben and Aunt Emma. Nora shifted uneasily. She recalled other family reunions. She hadn't forgotten the evening when her Uncle Joseph, who had finally emigrated to Australia, brought his wife and children to see them. Nor her own confirmation either. But Mrs. Hopper had known George and his family for years, from when he was a little boy, his hair smarmed down with hair oil, and his small, square, snubby nose in the middle of his face. He and Nora were going to be married. She looked up sharply, rose to her feet, her mind made up. She would set off to the ponds at once. Her father was safe downstairs in his easy-chair, his handkerchief over his head. It was the one thing he couldn't abide. Flies. And her mother in the next room, for the time being at least, must be far beyond all interest in Nora's doings. Her patchwork quilt half drawn up over her petticoats, the rest of her completely negligee. Nora's sudden hasty activity, however, had not been entirely unheeded. Her fiancé had at last realized that the young lady up above wasn't concerned just now with him and his fancy. He wasn't hurt, no fear. She had her moods and her silences. Pretending not to have been even hoping, he clapped his hands, and Nora watched from under the brim of the hat she was putting on before her looking-glass, as, with a sudden drumming flutter and scurry, away went the beautiful birds up into the vacant heavens, their wings cold and white as drifted snow, clapping together under the blue of the sky beneath the furious gaze of the sun. They gathered, they circled, they returned, as they always returned. Back to their little pagoda-like dovecote, back to Mr. Trimmon's sleek green and white greenhouse with its ripening tomatoes. Her hatpin between her teeth, Nora decided that he really was a good, sensible sort. That young Mr. Trimmons, in spite of his being such a sober-sides, and in spite of the interest and time he lavished on his almost uncanny knack with pigeons and tomatoes. She pushed home the pin, and in a few moments had slipped out into the blinding afternoon. The street was deserted. Its opposite row of yellow brick houses sat roasting in the sun, as if they had been hollowed out of one lump of clay, and now were crisp and finished. Someone was playing a hymn on a harmonium. The sound of it intensified the heat fourfold. But Nora didn't mind the heat. She loved it. Yet still, as she hastened on, with the steady clack, clack, clack of her best shoe heels on the glinting flagstones, something in her mind was doing its utmost to persuade her to turn back. But no, those full red lips closed more firmly. The sensible thing to do was to face things out, and on she went. At the end of the next street, she boarded a tram, and edged herself in onto the whole-pattern seat immediately facing a family of Sunday merrymakers. The father, with his little dark mustache, the mother, her ringed left hand pressed close against the bag she carried, and their 3 small children in a row beside them, 6, 4, and 2, with completely motionless bodies and unceasingly active red-brown eyes. It was stuffy in the tram. Nora watched the stagnant, shut-up shops slide by, the butcher's, the draper's, the dairy, the fried fish shop. The Admiral Napier, with its chipped, padlocked brown doors, suggested a frivolous attempt at disguising itself as a morgue, its upper paint a leprous gray. The confectioners were open, though, and so were the tobacconists. She could see the boys squatting on stools in their Sunday clothes, eating ices, and Mr. Jobson, in his shirt-sleeves, leaning over the last of his Sunday newspapers, smoking one of his own minute black cigars. Triple murder in Kensal Green. Blood-stained chopper found. Well-known peer charged with bigamy. The placards were always exciting on Sundays. Nora's gliding dark blue eyes snatched at their novelties as the tram in its steel grooves lurched on. It was the world she was used to, and it intensely interested her. But when she at length reached the ponds, their shelving banks shaded with lofty bowering willows, green and silver in the motionless sunlit air, they were all but deserted. At this first glimpse of them again, Nora sighed. Just that one deep draught of sweeter air that had filled her lungs had stilled her mind, set her heart beating. Her dark eyes had become almost as placid and absent as her father's. The water lay there, unruffled by even the faintest motion of the air, and blue as a plate beneath the sky. On the farther bank, but so far away that their shrill voices sounded not much louder than starlings, a swarm of small boys were disporting themselves, some shying stones into the water, while 2 or 3 of them were drying themselves in the sun, small, lean creatures standing mother-naked under the bowl of the sky on the warm green turf. And Nora at length softly turned her eyes towards her tree. This, too, was a willow, but it was a good many years older than most of its companions, and in part devoured and hollowed by rot. It leaned far out over the water from its few feet of grass-green sandy bank, and as she looked at it, the complete experience of the night before flooded back into memory. It wasn't as if that had been her first nocturnal visit. This, indeed, was one of Nora's own few secret resorts. She was friends with the place. She had paddled in its shallows with her schoolmates when quite a little girl. She knew its dangers, had been warned of them again and again. How then could she have been so stupid, so idiotic, to have stooped there, remotely, daydreaming in that quiet, starry darkness, leaning so far out over the water, with the perfectly ridiculous intention of trying to see her face in that dark mirror? The folly of it! As if to bid it good-bye. It would have served her right to have fallen in for good and all. What actually had happened, nothing so tragic, had happened in the twinkling of an eye. Either in sheer absent-mindedness, or because she had been startled suddenly by the squawking of a little owl in the branches over her head, her fingers had slipped, and in she had gone, down, down, like a stone, into the cold, greedy, caressing water. And in an instant or 2, though it had seemed an age, and an age crammed with the wild, incoherent, disturbing dream, she had come up again, panting, terrified, clutching, trembling, shuddering, but safe. Better to have drowned, almost, than to have proved oneself such a silly. But it was then, as if it were hovering in the darkness of the air, that strange phantom face had appeared. She had found herself gazing straight up into it, though whether, with the water streaming from her hair, Her eyes were open or shut, she could not remember. It was through those few everlasting moments the face had stayed there, lit faintly as if by some light of its own, smiling, seraphic, unchanging, the eyes faintly luminous, the cheek narrowing softly to the chin, the hair drawn gently backward from the brows. At length, and none too easily, Nora had pulled herself out, up onto the bank, had sat there, exhausted awhile, to recover her breath, her safety, and her wits. And then, having wrung some of the water out of her clothes, she had hurried off home by as obscure a route as she knew, and so up to her bedroom. Her mother had been ironing in the kitchen when she left home. One of the flat irons still sat cooling on the scorch-patterned ironing sheet beside its holder. Nora had glanced at it as she came in, and, like everything else in the kitchen, it seemed to be in collusion with her, and to be professing it. "We know. It's over now. Don't be afraid. We shan't split." None the less, Mrs. Hopper's sharp eyes had instantly noticed the change of clothes. "I thought you said George wasn't coming tonight. You haven't put a plate for him." And Nora, without a word, had gone to the dresser to fetch one. Why had she prevaricated? What was there to conceal? She didn't mind her mother. Why hadn't she confessed straight out that, like a fool, she had fallen into the water and had had the sense to change her clothes? To tell the truth was as much a habit with her as to wash her face in the morning and to do her hair. Yet she had looked back at her mother as if she had been accustomed to telling lies all her life. Lies, shameless, brazen. Yet, even while she did so, she had been perfectly conscious of that faintly outlined face still haunting senses, memory, heart, and mind. And it seemed to have no more connection with her mother, no more connection with telling the truth, and with living one's ordinary life, than, well, Nora had no comparison. A young man and a young woman were now straying hand in hand, aimlessly and vacantly, in her direction along the bank of the pond. The three small boys were squatting on the green grass in their shirts. The sun had descended a little in its narrowing autumnal arc. Nora, after yet another fleeting half-glance at the scene spread out before her, turned back and hastened home. Sunday tea was never a talkative meal. Unlike her husband, Mrs. Hopper was a heavy sleeper after meals, and, her Sabbath afternoon hour over, she invariably stumped down from her bedroom, cross, flushed, and staring, and with sleep-glazed eyes, like a gently gaping fish. This afternoon the meal was briefer than usual. There was high tea or early supper to get, and Uncle Ben had a critical eye and a fastidious palate. But there's nothing like getting busy and working hard at whatever comes next, to prevent one's mind from brooding on what one is trying not to remember. Nora even sang over the peeling of the potatoes, and Mrs. Hopper wondered, on hearing her, why, when she herself was young, she had been so squeamish, so straight-laced. Alf had been a good husband, as husbands go, but there are all kinds of men. In spite of her mother's rather cantankerous snort at the arrangement, Nora seated herself between her father and Aunt Emma at the supper table. But Mrs. Hopper was a woman as easily placated as she was put out, and her hospitality was second nature to her. "There's Elf now," she would explain. "He can't be anywhere but he's alone. He can't be anywhere but cooped up in his shell. Not me. Give me faces. Give me company. Give me talk. I'd mope me head off with nobody to see." There was no doubt of it. The dark round table with its cold boiled leg of mutton, its steak and kidney pie, pickles and beetroot, and glass and cutlery, and the china lamp in the middle, was packed as close with humanity as chairs would allow. They might be animals colloguing together. Yet Mr. Hopper merely sat quietly smiling there, and looking as much alone as if he were an ascetic Robinson Crusoe on his desert island. Uncle Ben, however, having assured himself that his sister-in-law hadn't forgotten his distaste for bottled beer, and his penchant for whiskey, had lost no chance to keep up his reputation as a wag and a lady-killer. And with Aunt Emma for flattering ally, and Miss Mullings, as a new victim so far as he was concerned, sidling but appreciative, for audience, there was soon an unceasing roar of talk and laughter. And as naturally as flies round a chandelier, it had circled about the guests of the evening. The doomed bachelor, the greenhorn of matrimony, the wisecrack's easiest cockshy, George. George was solid. George was a stayer, a bit thick-headed, if you like, but none the worse for that, perhaps, when life wields so clumsy a club and cracks a sensitive skull as easily as a steam hammer cracks eggs. George was there, to bear the brunt, to play the butt, the future bridegroom. And George, in his tight-starched collar and neat pepper-and-salt suit, had met every sally with unfailing good humor, even though, with his head bent forward a little and his dark brown eyes slightly bulging, he resembled the while a bullock staring out of a cattle truck. Uncle Ben had the richest stock of jokes for all occasions, from a christening to a funeral, but his merriest were on the subject of widows, mothers-in-law, and young people in love. Lor, now, Ben, Mrs. Hopper had come to the rescue at last. Give him a chance. Give him a chance. With a hiccup of ribald amusement and a sigh of exhaustion, she wiped away the tears from her eyes. Chance? Retorted Uncle Ben, turning his long nose in her direction. What's he want with chances? Hasn't he had his chance, and hasn't he taken it? And won't he? George shifted an inch or two on his chair. He don't want no chances, Aunt Em intervened, drawing her hand across her mouth. He's happy enough, I can see, and so would any young man be. What I say is, said Uncle Ben with extraordinary solemnity, and almost squinting at his friends, from eyes that were, even at ordinary moments, formidably close together, what I say is, he's joined the old Redoubtables. He's taken the plunge and come up smiling. He looked firmly at the tumbler in his hand. Anybody to hear that, Mr. Hopper, Miss Mullings insinuated, would suppose that a journey to the altar was no better than a young couple going to their execution. Altar, did you say, Miss Mullings, or halter? Inquired Uncle Ben punctiliously. And what, might I ask you, does anybody expect at an execution? Why, to lose his head. Aye, and to have it picked up out of the sawdust before the trickling lids are down over the eyes. When I think of our young friends on that track, well, there. His voice sank into a plangent whisper, and he emptied his glass. My heart bleeds for them. Pull the longbow, you do, Mrs. Hopper expostulated. Why, if it wasn't telling secrets, I recollect a time, Ben, when you, as near as possible, fell into the trap yourself, and a nice plump young widow, too, though I'm not too sure all that hair was her own. Mr. Hopper, who had been steadily and quietly eating the while, at this gently slid his eyes in his brother's direction, and smiled. It was like a watery glint of sunlight in a raining sky. That, retorted Uncle Ben imperturbably, is what might look to be a bull's-eye, but twice shy is my rendering of it. I read the other day, in an old book I came across, of 2 islands out in the east there, 300 miles apart. 2 islands, one inhabited by nothing but men, and the other by, well, in short, women. So I know where I'm going to when I die. But which, Mr. Hopper? Murmured Miss Mullings. Uncle Ben threw up his 2 knuckly hands. Kamerad, kamerad, he cried. Now, George, here, he began again. George pushed his chin a little further over his stiff collar and swallowed. There's some of us not so easily taken in, he muttered thickly. What I say is, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The worm had turned, but at the sound of his voice, Nora had begun hastily collecting the dirty plates together in preparation for the plum tart and custard and a plum pudding that Mrs. Hopper, since the Christmas before, had faithfully reserved for whatever occasion Providence might propose. And it was not until after the supper dishes had been cleared away, and Uncle Ben, who didn't think even as much as small beer of all this vaudeville, had entertained the company with a few out of his familiar repertory of songs, that the attention of the little party suddenly centered itself on Nora. From her brief solitude in the scullery, she had slipped back into the room again and seated herself beside her father. His hand had crept out and gently clasped her own for a moment, where it lay in her lap, palm upwards, on her knee. Aunt Emma, at the same moment, with a curious crab-like movement, had slipped from her stool at the old rosewood silk-pleated piano, and Uncle Ben, whose third song had not been received with precisely the volume of applause to which he was accustomed, had observed this furtive little caress. "Now, if I was a goose," he cried gallantly, "there's one young lady present which I don't believe could say bo to me nohow. What do you think, pretty Miss Pensive, now with them dark eyes?" Mrs. Hopper, who up to this moment had seemed to be completely unaware of her daughter's small share in the evening's entertainment, suddenly lost patience. "God's sake, she sat there dumb as an image all the blessed evening. What's wrong with you, girl?" At this, George's eyes, which had been as steadily fixed on his beloved as a bullock's in a truck on a drift of green pasture at the railroad's edge, turned heavily away, while a dull red mounted up into his naturally dusky face. "I'm all right, Mother," said Nora. She was alone in the world again, for at first sound of Mrs. Hopper's rebuke, Mr. Hopper had withdrawn his hand. "If you was all right, as you call it," retorted Mrs. Hopper, "you'd prove you had a tongue in your head. She's been like this for days together," she explained to Aunt Emma. "I can't think what's come over the child." "Maybe she's not feeling quite the thing," Miss Mullings suggested sympathetically. "Now then, George, what about it?" challenged Uncle Ben, in full tilt again at the dragon. Nora had pushed herself more securely into her chair. "I don't mind being laughed at, not a bit," she began. "Not myself. If I couldn't stand being laughed at, I'd go into a home for the feeble-minded. But I don't believe even you, Uncle Ben, would be talking quite so free if you'd been nearly drowned last night." The strange dismal word resounded through the little lamp-lit room like the call of a bugle. Complete silence fell. Uncle Ben gaped where he stood. Then Mrs. Hopper crossed her legs viciously and clasped her hands together. "What kind of tale are you telling us now?" she cried angrily. Nora stared steadily into her mother's face. "I said drowned, Mother. I went out for a walk last night to the ponds. It's nobody else's business, and I fell in." "Fell in, my dear?" Mr. Hopper's voice rang dulcet as a sweet bell in the midst of the baaings of a flock of sheep. "Yes, Dad, and went clean under, too. Miles. It's steep there, but it was nothing to worry about. I soon scrambled out. But naturally," she drew her hand over her forehead, "it's given me a bit of a headache, perhaps." "What I wouldn't wonder at, my fine lady," cried her mother, "is if you aren't in bed come tomorrow morning with the raging cold and inflammation of the lungs, or something of that sort, traipsing back all that way through the streets like a cod in a fishmonger's shop. I don't know what they'll think of you, and not to say a single word to your mother neither." "Feel my hand, Dad," said Nora. "That's cool enough, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with me, Mother, and I came back by the back ways. It's when everybody begins talking, and I don't see why, and you all keep on at George. Why, it makes everything look silly. What can't be made to look silly? There's always those who'll laugh, but I'd rather not say anything more about it." "Now, what I say," Uncle Ben, as usual, pranced gallantly to the rescue. "What I say is," he repeated, his two cold small eyes as grey-blue as agates on either side of his long inquisitive nose, Is that what they call a parable? Didn't I say an hour ago that George here had taken the plunge and come up smiling? And what's Nora done else? She won't hurt. Bless you. Strong, healthy young creature like that, Polly. None of your lackadaisical young ladies that die of pneumonia from a draught not strong enough to blow the powder off their noses. She's all right. There now, Polly, she's all right. The prettiest of chips from the handsomest of blocks. He pushed himself in on the little sofa beside his sister-in-law and put his arm round her waist. "Oh, you old fool," retorted Mrs. Hopper with amiable scorn, flinging his hand aside. "You are all fat and nothing to fry. I've no patience with you." But the position was saved, and Nora's only penalty was a good-sized couple of spoonfuls of Uncle Ben's whiskey in half a tumbler of scalding hot water. "If you insist on gadding about by yourself in the dark, my girl, and having cold baths in public, you must take the consequences," said Mrs. Hopper as she dropped 2 lumps of sugar into the steam. Nora slipped out after George into the dusky passage. "Honest, Nora," he breathed hoarsely into her ear, "you're not feeling ill?" "Ill? Not me. I'll come along with you, George. Keep quiet. Stay there. I won't be a minute." She hastened up to her room. It was filled with a clear, still darkening twilight. Her face glowed softly in the glass, and she could see dovecote and greenhouse in the dark-shadowed garden below as plainly as if they had been carved by magic out of mystery for the scene of a play. She paused in marvel of it a moment, then pulled on her hat and hurried softly out again. And George was waiting for her where she had left him. Like the lion on the brewery, he hadn't moved the fraction of an inch. "I like coming out when no one knows anything about it," she whispered as he opened the door. "I'm tired of all that, George." Not even the faintest of the fleeciest of clouds showed in the sky above the double row of small brick houses in the empty street, and the air was crisp and cold, as if the small hours might bring a tang of frost. A waning moon was showing in the west, shedding her faint light into the crystalline grey-blue sky. The two of them walked on in silence until they reached the end of the street. A few hundred yards beyond the next, the branches of plane trees jutted out at right angles from their party-colored boles above the asphalt walks of the recreation grounds. There was a faint, musty odor in the air, mingled with that of autumnal flowers, beginning now to go to seed in the borders around them. "Honest, Nora, did you really fall into the pond?" George asked. His voice still sounded slightly thick and inhuman, as if an animal were attempting to converse. "You didn't think I was telling a lie, George?" "I didn't think nothing about it, except you never told me. Do you often go out alone?" Nora's breast rose beneath her jacket. "You know I often go out alone, and why shouldn't I? I like being alone. I shall always want to be alone when I want to be. There's no harm in that I can see. I can take care of myself. Mother just talks. She wants things to go as she wants them to go." "You might have been drowned in that pond. It's a good 8 feet deep near that upper bank. If that's what you call going out alone, why—" "But I didn't get drowned, or I wouldn't be here now. As if catching cold and that stuff, why, what about them sillies that break the ice in the Serpentine all through the winter? And it wasn't the falling into the pond that I was thinking about. It wasn't that at all." "If you don't want to tell me nothing, I don't know as how I want to hear it," mumbled the young man in the billycock hat. "Oh, Lord, George, for heaven's sake. There's a seat. Let's sit down." The two of them seated themselves a few inches coldly apart, in a dusk cast by a neighboring lamp-post and by the increasing luminousness of the moon. "When in the dark I went down into that pond, George, and I want to tell you about it. It was not like what they say about such things. I seemed to be falling into an enormous black pit, and it seemed it would never end. But it wasn't, as they say, just memories that came back to me. There were no horrible eyes staring at me and voices shouting. No, not at me, but together, across. And when, at last, I came up again and managed to breathe and to see a little, I was just clutching at anything, and it was a lucky little thing for me that a stubby root was there. But George had guessed, in some obscure groping fashion of his own, that this was not the end, was not even the important part of Nora's confession. He refused to be sympathetic. He sat stiff as a ramrod, staring straight in front of him under the brim of his hat. You had no call to be there alone at that time of night. You had no call to be doing things secret-like. Nora listened, her knees pressed tight together, her lips set hard. There would be time to argue when she had finished what she wished to say. But it wasn't just that I am trying to tell you. There isn't anything in that. It was what happened. Then... George's mouth opened a little. His face groped round in her direction. It was the face I saw that won't... I keep on seeing it. I don't know how to explain. It was while, knowing I was safe, I was floating there in the water. It was there, above, looking at me, smiling at me, as if... Her speech had become more and more animated. What I mean is, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't in my head, in my mind, as you might say. It wasn't fancy. The clear young voice trembled, as if in triumph at the word. I know that. It was outside, there, a little above me, before my very eyes. I saw it, George, as I hung there in the water, and I wasn't excited or scared or struggling any more. I looked through my eyes, straight up at it, and by then I think the moon must have come out of the clouds. It was all silver on the water, and that face there, smiling at me. It seemed, as you might say, I had gone in under a dark, dreadful tunnel and come out the other side. Come out on what other side? The young man blurted. Why, the other side. Nora lifted her hand as if she could make a picture of what she intended in the air. The other side of all this, I mean. It was real, and yet it wasn't real. You might almost have been a child. It was so clear, so simple, and it's never left me. It's made everything different. You see, George, and, oh, I know it sounds ridiculous, it was something to do with me myself. She stooped forward over her lap, staring hard at the asphalt beneath her foot. And I don't know as how I've ever seen anything that... The square young ardent face turned sidelong a little, and lit with the vague elusive smile he had never seen before, solemnly challenged the young man. You aren't trying to help me much. George once more shifted uneasily in his seat. You told me to shut my mouth a minute ago, so I'm keeping it shut. You say you'd never seen him before. Nora burst out laughing. She listened to herself laughing, laughter as carefree as a green woodpecker's. Seen him before? Oh, George, him? I clean don't know what you're talking about. I never thought of it as being a him, and I didn't say it was either. I've had enough of those claptrap islands of Uncle Ben's this evening, and all that widow talk, and I should have thought you had too. As if there wasn't anything but he's and she's to sniff and snigger about. And if there was nothing but silly jokes about just two people like you and me getting married, and all that. I don't know how they come to it, that I don't. What I'm saying is... Yet again the challenge rang out almost shrilly. That's what I saw and keep on seeing. And I'm asking you, George, why shouldn't I? As if I cared what other people think of me, as long as it's my own self. Who has any right, I should like to know, to say anything about what happens in anybody's mind? She looked away, paused, then turned almost tenderly to the young man. Oh, George, if only I could make you see it too. I don't believe as you'd ever care to look at me again. There's pictures, but not like that. I'm nothing. And yet, cried the rational young man. "Only a minute or two ago, on this very seat here, you were just making fools of us all for being he's and she's. As if that old nosey. I can't make out what you're getting at, and," he gulped, "I don't know as how really I want to." His voice died away. The earthy, cold night air, having been rent asunder by its stridency, welled back unwounded, unreceptive. Not a soul was in sight, and that hastening footstep beyond the clustering trees might be nothing but a phantom's for all that was actually visible. Nora gazed vacantly. She was perfectly at ease, perfectly happy. All would come right. It was curious indeed, when things looked so muddled and gloomy, that she should be conscious how strong and how free she felt in her body. It seemed that nothing she would ever attempt to do again could possibly fret or weary her, that she was capable of an infinitude of patience, of energy and labor. But for the moment she must grope along gently and quietly. "This is what I mean, George," she said, "if you will try and be a little patient. Did you ever see anything as if you had never really seen it before? I mean, more beautiful, as they say, more as though there was a sort of secret between you and it. Why, this lamplight here now, George, on this old plank, on the wood, look at that. Do you see? There are two kinds of shadows of the leaves. They're like curious hands, webbed, like duck's feet, and you can hardly tell where the dark and where the light begins. It's the moon and the lamp there, shining together, and here are you and me sitting here together too, and we don't know where it all comes from or what it all means either. It's so still, George, I feel I could escape out of my body for ever and ever. Not that I want to, I'm too strong for that, but that's what I mean when I think about the face I'm telling you of. Only much more. It will all fade away and go, of course, but—" She turned eagerly. "Supposing I'd sunk right down into that pond again, under the willow trees, and my body had stayed there, well, I shouldn't be here now, talking to you, should I, George?" "All I can say is," retorted the young man bitterly, "it's lucky your mother isn't hearing what you are saying." "I'm leaving Mother out now," Nora said, "but I believe Father would understand a little what I mean. We don't know, George. You can't say that if I'd gone then, I'd be the same as I am now. I don't believe it. I don't believe that what I was then, sinking down as if forever into that dark and cold, and then looking up calm and peaceful at what was waiting there for me, is what I was when I was sitting there just now, hearing Uncle Ben singing that silly rubbish, leering and going on like that, and all. He's soured, is Uncle Ben, and he doesn't want to show it." "I don't see as how the songs were particularly silly, as you call it," George lied. "There's some like to take a high and mighty view." "Well, never mind, George, they were," Nora said. "I didn't mean to be high and mighty, only just the truth, and it doesn't matter either way. If you want me, George, I suppose you've got to have all of me, but if you don't know what's there, you can't blame me if some of it's kept back. No, I don't mean that either. No one can ever have all of anybody, I mean. Now and then, when I think of it, I'm almost sorry I didn't not come back last night. I'd like to be where that face came from. Why shouldn't I be, if it was my own? You can call it just a silly dream, or you can call it a nightmare, if you like. What's words? It's what it meant to me that matters most, and if you can't put up with me, George, I don't know what we shall do." Nora hadn't suspected that the nerves of the young man beside her were quite so near the snapping point. The only sound he uttered was a sort of breathless grunt as he stooped forward, his elbows on his knees, and hid his face in his hands, thrusting back his hard round hat on his neatly oiled hair as he did so. "I don't know by what right," Nora looked at him and looked again. "I don't know by what right you're taking what I've said like that, George. I needn't have told you at all." "What I don't follow," replied a stubborn, almost blubbering voice, "is why anybody should want to hush up anything about their own faces. How could it have been more lovely-like if it was yours?" "You didn't mean that so nice as it sounds. Don't you carry about any pictures of yourself better than the reflections of what you see in a glass? And even that's often better than real. You don't think, George, surely, it's just your face that I love, and looking like that either. Why, it's you, what perhaps nobody else sees at all. We don't know where we come from, do we?" "Keep your secrets," groaned the young man, "and I'll keep mine." "If you call that secrets, George," she flamed, "then all I can say is you're treating me mean. But you don't seem to see it. I've never been so happy as I was all the time when I was alone today, sitting up there in my bedroom, and you with your pigeons and the sunshine and all. And I thought perhaps you might understand. I don't think I wish to be sitting here any more like this now. We'll go home." They walked in silence together till they reached the turn of the street, and then Nora slipped her firm hand into George's hard square one as he stalked along beside her. And so they arrived at number 29. The lights had been put out in the sitting-room. Not a gleam showed beneath the Venetian blinds, but the moon had now begun to shine full on Allenbury Street. They came to a standstill. Nora drew her hand away, lifted her face, and looked up at the solitary, glaring satellite. "Won't you say a single word?" George breathed huskily. "You aren't going to leave me like that?" Nora stooped forward, the hard brim of her young man's hat biting deep into her cheek as she did so. "I don't believe as you're anything more than a child, George, when all's said. Are you jealous because my face is more lovely than you'll ever see it? My face, Lord!" "You can't marry a child," George almost sobbed. "Promise, Nora, promise." Nora drew back. "I'll never promise a single thing," she retaliated. "As if you don't know that whatever was not me wouldn't just shed off like the skin from an onion. I'll just keep what I'll keep. And what I meant was, I'm glad to be back, but I'm gladder still to know." She stared at the moon, squeezed the hard hand clutched in hers, but could get no further. And in less than a minute the door had closed behind her. And George, a few tiny drops of dew chilling his face, having surveyed the glittering curtained windows, presently went on, along with his shadow, in his dark clothes and his round-topped hat, along the narrow, vast-skied, vacant, moon-glossed street.